Well, I appreciate everyone showing up tonight. Hopefully, at some point in the future, we'll be able to all meet up again. I I'm not confident that it's going to be this year, but the Zoom meetings, at least for our group, have been nice because we've been able to get a lot of experts in different topics that we wouldn't have the chance to hear from otherwise. And I think, in this hobby, there's a lot of good, interesting people. And you find on cloudy nights that there's lots of people doing presentations for other clubs. I know I've done 2 or 3 for different clubs, and people are always, you reach out to people, even some people you don't really know, and people are really good about helping out and wanting to talk about this kind of thing. So I'm really happy with the Zooms, and I think we'll probably continue some of them once we can meet in person again. But I don't know what you guys think, but
it sure beats a 100-mile round trip. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I've been inviting people that I know from around the country, and so we get a lot of good stuff. So with that, I guess shortly after the last meeting, I was looking around for topics again, and one of the guys I saw, he was on a Tucson Zoom that I think I gave a small presentation to, and I had seen his work for years, and he makes these huge detailed panoramic images, and they're really fantastic. And then a few days later, I saw that he had an astronomy picture of the day, and I thought, oh, it can't hurt. Maybe I'll reach out to him. Greg told me that he was great, and Greg Ruppel, and he graciously decided to join us tonight and give us our main presentation. So with that, I'll pass it over to Alistair. Is that how to pronounce it?
Yeah, you got it exactly right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I thanks for inviting me to present. And I do live in Tucson, although you can tell from my accent, I wasn't born here. I moved here from the UK about 15 years ago, but coming to Tucson was what let me really get into astrophotography. I was interested in it before, but for people who've ever been to the UK or lived in the UK, you'll know that clear nights are few and far between. But yeah, so I was going to take you through a presentation that I did. Probably it's an updated version of one I actually gave to the Advanced Imaging Conference back in 2012. And let me just share my screen here, and we'll see which one of these looks like the right thing. Doesn't look like it wants to let me share. I don't normally use Zoom, you see. I usually use my WebEx is what we use for work. Let's try that. Let's see what happens if we do that.
It just gave you more permissions. You might have a
yeah. It wants me to go and do a preference thing. So let me just update the preferences. Yeah, there we go. All right. I'm going to have to quit and rejoin though, so I'll be back in a second with the update. Okay. Hold on a minute.
He must be on a Mac.
Anybody detect a little bit of a New Zealand accent there?
He said UK.
Yeah.
He said the UK.
Yeah, I wonder if he was UK via New Zealand or vice versa.
There he is.
All right, we should work now. Hopefully it updates in my preference. Yes, that looks better. All right, good. Already looking better. All right. Hopefully you can see the presentation now.
Yes.
Yes.
Screen show, still see it okay?
Yes.
All right, good. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about how to make wide field mosaics. And when I mean wide field here, I mean crazy wide field mosaics. But doing it in a way that doesn't lose a lot of the real detail in the nebulas, but not taking you 100 years, because this is a pretty wide image that you see here. I haven't ever counted the number of degrees in it, but it certainly wasn't taken at a long focal length with 200 images. That would have just been crazy and taken me forever. So I use a different technique that I'll describe here. So how do you go about creating these wide field images, but without sacrificing some of the detail in the nebula? Well, you've got two methods, and I've used method one for many years to do mosaics, which is a really good way of doing it, and quite a bit of the imaging is still done this way for me. But you can take tens of images through a relatively long focal length refractor or other telescope. I had a Takahashi TOA 130 about 8 years ago when I did this presentation, but I've since upgraded it to an FSQ 106. So the focal length has come down a bit to 530 millimeters. But even at 530, you still need a lot of images to build a wide field mosaic. And it's a lot of work to do that. And if you want to go super wide, like you just saw with the Orion area, that would have taken, I just don't even know how many images that would have taken with a 530 millimeter scope. It would have taken a lot, and it would have been a lot of processing work. So a quicker way to do it, and that was quite interesting, there was I thought I'd kind of stumbled across something new when I really started doing this about 2 years ago, this second method. And I thought I might have stumbled across something new and an innovative way of doing things. And then I read in, I think it was an astronomy magazine about 2 or 3 months ago, maybe it was 2, Steve Canistra had written an article. I'm like, darn, that's this methodology. That's exactly what I'm doing. And it works really well. So the way that I do it now for most of my really wide field images, I'll take images through the refractor, and sometimes there'll be mosaics that I take through the refractor for the nebula area that has a lot of detail. But for the wider background, you can take that through like a camera lens attached to the CCD camera, which gives it a 10x larger field of view. So I've taken images through 70 millimeters, 85 millimeters, sometimes 35, and you'll even see one at the end, which I did with a 14 millimeter. So if you take the background through the lower focal length lens, the wider field of view lens, you can take a few of those images and then embed the more detailed images from the longer focal length refractor inside them and blend them in, and you get this perception of a really detailed image because you've got all the detail where it counts, but you've saved all that imaging time for the boring star backgrounds around them, right? If I can call it that way. So this method saves a lot of time. And really the software that I use that makes this possible, both of the methods possible for me, I think there's other software out there that does it now. And maybe it does it better, but I still use the same software. And that is Registar. I found that is simply the most reliable piece of astronomy imaging registration software that there is. And not only does it let you register images that are overlapped to probably 10 or 15% like you would do in a typical mosaic, but it lets you take images from different focal length setups that you've processed individually. And I can take a 530 millimeter refractor image processed, may have taken it a year ago, and I can go out and take a single 85 millimeter or 70 millimeter camera lens image that image is contained in, and I can take Registar and I can it will register that 530 mil image into the 85 millimeter image. It will resize it, it will rotate it, it will do everything, and you just blend it in using Photoshop. And that's the software that makes this very easy to do, in my view. There may be other packages that do it. I just think it was about $150. It's possibly the best $150 I spent in the hobby because I use it extensively. So if I show you the setup that I use, and it's morphed a lot over time. This is what it currently looks like. It's a 2-camera setup. Because I use the refractor that you can see in the middle of all the setup and cables there, the white diffractor, that's the FSQ 106. It's got an STXL 11002 on the back end of that with a guiding filter wheel. And I do both narrowband and RGB imaging with it. And then I started experimenting 2 years ago with another camera on top of that setup. You see it to the top left. And on the right-hand picture is a close-up of the current really wide field imaging system. And I started with an STF 8300. You'll see some images taken with an STF 8300 and a 35 millimeter lens, and also and a 70 millimeter lens I used to use on that 8300 as well. And then through a strange quirk, I ended up with a second STXL 11002, and that allowed me to basically have two cameras with the same layout. And the top camera that sits on piggybacked on the scope has the 85 mil lens. I created myself a robo-focus autofocuser mechanism on it with a little bit of engineering. And so I can actually autofocus that lens as well on that camera. So I can choose which camera to use every night. Some nights I'll use the 530, some nights I'll use the 85 millimeter, and they're both the same cameras, so they're all the same ratio, same pixel sizes from that standpoint. So that's the setup, and it's on a Paramount MX mount. So I've got my backyard observatory that will let me do automated images, because collecting a lot of light data is kind of key to doing the wide field mosaics. So if we start with how to do this, it all starts in the planning. So when you're going to do a mosaic, you've really got to plan it out well. You've got to decide basically how many images you're willing to take, and plan it out with some planetarium software that you can then import the plan into automation software in my case, because I want to run it automated, maybe taking more than one of these images of a mosaic in one night. And I want it to do it while I'm asleep and not having to sit out with it. So what I do is I use the SkyX for this. I've used that for many years now. This is an older version of the SkyX that's shown in this presentation. It's got a great mosaic feature in there. You can program the SkyX with your field of view of your particular camera lens or your particular telescope and CCD combination. And it will draw the mosaic grid for that particular focal length over the area of sky that you want. And you can tell it how many images high, how many images wide. You can tell it what the overlap percentage is that you want. I typically use 15% or so in my image overlap. You can go as high as 20, but you can be very successful with 15. The lower percentage overlap, the harder job you'll have on image registration and blending, as you tend to get kind of more of artifacts around the edges of your image than in the center. So I go with the 15% overlap typically, and I plan it out in the SkyX. And once you've kind of you've selected your mosaic in the SkyX, for my imaging software, my imaging control software, I use a program called CCD Autopilot. I know there's many other ones out there that people use. This is the one I've used to good success. But the same principle applies. You can take the SkyX and import its mosaic feature into many different automated pieces of astronomical software. I like Autopilot because it's pretty user-friendly. And it's got a mosaic button that you click, and it imports the entire set of mosaics that you saw on the previous screen, all its RA and DEC coordinates straight into the software. And then you just program up the durations that you want, and it goes away and takes them. And this is how I do all my mosaics. And so it's always by creating there in the SkyX, importing to Autopilot, and then letting it do the image collection for me while I sleep. So I just wanted to show you a bit about image acquisition and how to plan it, because the key is to get the images that are overlapped and plan it in a way that you can get the overlap so that you've minimized the number of images to get a 15% overlap. Because if you're not thinking of in a grid like that, you're going to end up with a bit haphazard plan, and you're probably going to end up with half your images over overlapping by 50%, and that's not necessarily what you want for the most efficient session. So that's how I plan it. That's how I image it. So let's talk about how we process it, because that's where all the fun really is and where the work really begins for me, other than the planning and setting the automation software going. So I'm going to take you through a processing of an image that is a 10-image mosaic of the cone to the Rosette Nebula. And this was all taken at the 700 millimeter focal length of my TOA 130. And it's going to be how I did a hydrogen alpha LRGB blended image and ended up with the image on the bottom right here. So simply stated, and I'm not going to take you through the steps of how to do this, because I'm pretty sure everybody on the meeting here knows how to do an individual image and make an LRGB image from a single set of stacked images. I'm going to explain how you do it. Once you've got your set of 10 images, your 10 LRGBs and your 10 hydrogen alphas, well, how do you actually take those individual images you've processed and build the final mosaic? So you'll process, and how I will do it with HA LRGBs is I'll process the hydrogen alpha separately and create a mosaic from that. And I'll take the 10 LRGB individually processed images and I'll create a mosaic from that. And then I'll put the hydrogen alpha on top of the LRGBs to create the final image. And I'll take you step by step through how I typically do that. So there's a couple of ways even here you can approach this. And the way I've used up until very recently, until I got the ability to take a wider field, low resolution image, was, you'll read this a couple of ways of doing it. One is to take a low resolution image and register your images, your main 700 millimeter focal length images against that lower resolution image, and then you don't have to even worry about the image overlap quite as much to do your registration. It's going to use the stars in the lower resolution image to do the registration. But I didn't have, when I did a lot of these higher, longer focal length mosaics, I didn't have a lower focal length setup to take that wider field picture. And so as a result, I used an iterative technique. And I still use that by and large today because I find it works pretty well. And I don't have to take that wider field image to register my more high resolution images onto. However, I'll show you an image where I've used that technique and it actually worked pretty well. So if you're going to use this iterative approach, the way you do this is, first of all, you're going to take two of the images that are 15% overlapped, and then you're going to register them together, and then you're going to blend them together to form a 2-image mosaic. And once you've got your 2-image mosaic, what you'll do with that is you'll put that back into the registration software, and you'll take your 3rd image and you'll register it to the 2-image mosaic. And then you'll build a 3-image blended image in Photoshop, as we'll see. And then you take that back into the registration software and you add the 4th image, and you keep iterating that approach until you do as many as you want. The most I've ever done with this technique myself is about 10. And at that point on 500 to 700 millimeter focal length, you start to get to the point where the registration errors over that wider field of view, and the fact that the sky is becoming, the field of view curvature has become such that you will find that if you go wider than that, you'll start to find it, your registered image will start to look a bit weird. When you tack that 11th image onto that 12th image, it will start to look distorted. And at that point, the iterative approach breaks down. And that's where that wider field image, if you can take it with a very wide field of view and let you use that as your registration layer for the more high resolution ones, can actually come into its own. Because I went to 20 image higher resolution images at 530 millimeters registered onto an 85 millimeter wide field. And that registration process worked really well. And I didn't have to worry about what happened when I went beyond 10 images. But if you want to get into this and just start with 2-image mosaics and 3-image mosaics, this iterative techniques works brilliantly. So I thought we'd start with that. So how do you do it? Well, I mentioned the Registar software. So here's two of my LRGB images. We've got the Rosette Nebula because we're doing the cone to Rosette, and we've got the image that's to the left of it. But you wouldn't really be able to see that it's to the left of it. It doesn't look in any way, shape, or form that it belongs next to the Rosette because it's rotated slightly differently, and it's slightly offset. So, and it might even be, it's on the opposite side of the meridian flip. So what we're going to do though is we're going to let Registar take all of that thinking away from us. So what you do is you take those two images into Registar, and then you're going to select the image that you want to register. And so if you look at the box on the left in Registar, when you do a registration, it comes up and says register the source images, which is Rosette left. So we're going to take that left image and we're going to register it with the image on the right, which happens to be called Rosette HALRGB. And in this case, what we do is we want to do what's called a union. You'll see on the right-hand side that we can say we want to create a registration that's a union. So it's like a set union of these two images. So it's going to register the two images and it's going to make an image scale that's the same as the union of these two images registered together. So you just select the image, click union, hit register, that's all you do. And next it will pop up a display like this. And what you see here is that red area on the left, that's the image you were going to register, and it's registered it with a kind of greenish looking version of the image on the right. And you can see in that gray area in the middle, that's where the 15% overlap was. And it just used that star overlap area, that's 15%. That was enough for Registar to figure out how to register these two images perfectly. As I say, if you build this up to 10 images, it can start to, you get distortion, but at low number of images, it's very, very accurate. So there you go. I got my image registered with the one on the right, but I'm now gonna save that image, the one that I just registered, which is the one on the left. And then what I need to do is need to make the original image, which was the Rosette Nebula, the same image scale and dimensions as that union that we got with the one on the left. And that's where the crop pad function comes in on Registar. You go back to the Rosette, you hit crop pad, and you just say union with the Rosette left image. And now it's going to make it the same dimensions so it fits exactly over in the right place, the one on the left. And so when you hit crop pad, oh look, you've got an image now that looks the same dimensions as the one you originally registered. And you save both of those and you're ready to import them into Photoshop and do the blend. So this is the first step of the iteration. So you take both of those images into Photoshop, and what you do is you'll take one image and you'll select it, you'll copy it, and you'll paste it as a layer over the other image. So I've got an image here with two layers. And what we can see in this case is the Rosette is layer one over the background layer, which happens to be the image on the left. But of course we can't see the image on the left because this image has got a big black space because Registar filled its crop pad with black. So what we do now is we want to reveal the image underneath it, which is the Rosette image from the left-hand side. So I just selected an area around that black area I want to get rid of, and I cut it away. And when you cut it away, oh, there it appears. You can now see the image underneath, and we've got this black join that we have to deal with. So this is, because we're in Photoshop, that's the magic of layers. I'm sure people are fairly familiar with that. But in Photoshop with layers, you can create a layer mask. And so I create a layer mask on the Rosette image that's on the right-hand side to let a reveal all image so I can see everything that's underneath it. And I can see that background layer that happens to be the left-hand side image. And now I can paint on that mask area and I can hide a bit of the black band and the first bit of the sky area on the image on the right. I can paint over that mask area to hide that join. So I go paint over that area in the mask. You can see that little black line in the white mask up to the lower right in the layers section. And you can see that the black kind of band join went away. But it's still, they don't look particularly, homogeneous just yet, right? You can see that the image on the left and the one on the right, they're slightly different brightnesses because they've been processed individually by hand, and it's never a completely 100% repeatable process. So this is where you have to be a bit kind of painstaking and be able to devote a bit of time to it. And you use other tools in Photoshop to adjust the images so that they blend nicely and they match. And so what we'll typically use for that is we'll use curves to address brightness differences in the images. We might use color balance to tweak the color. We might use selective color to tweak certain colors that are different. And it's all by eye and to taste until you think it looks pretty seamless. I've never found a way to do this automatically. And I know that there's panorama software in Photoshop, but I've never successfully managed to use that to the extent that I can use it with my own capability to do it. So by hand, it can take a little bit of fiddling with, but when you get used to the process, it's like maybe 2 or 3 minutes an image. I can do it that quickly now because I know all the typical tools, I know the tricks, the techniques. You just got to practice with it and it becomes faster. So let's look at how I did this. We're going to work with curves to correct it. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower the brightness on the left-hand image. You can see it's already looking in the curves function. I brought down the darker area of the image. It looks a bit more blended already, so we'll go with that. What next? Well, now we're gonna blend this area in the top right. We're gonna fix one of the issues that was wrong with that, and we're gonna boost the area for the top right of the left-hand image to match in with the image of the rosette. So we'll change the curves there. We've selected the area we want to brighten. We go and use the curves function to brighten it, and then that's taken care of that. Well, it doesn't quite look right down here on the bottom left of the bottom right of the left-hand image. I need to just darken that a bit. Didn't look quite right. So we go in and use the curves tool again. As you can see, we're tweaking at different bits of areas in the image. And eventually we're going to get to the point where we have to start doing some color adjustments. And so this place we're using to adjust the green because it looked a bit different color to me on the screen at the time. And we'll adjust the green channel with curves to drag that down a little bit, just to make it look more natural. And there we can go. I didn't quite like the blend in the center bit, so I drew another lasso around that to select that area, adjusted the curves, adjusted that to blend. And at the end point here, we've got something that looks like those two images are overlapped. I could probably have tweaked a bit more. I'm a bit more fussy than I was when I did this mosaic back then. I'd have typically drawn a lasso around the brighter stars to the left and the rosette and to the right of that left image in the middle there, and I'd have taken those star brightnesses down. But it's pretty close. It's getting pretty close now to the point where you might want to take that back into Registar and add the third image. So off we go and do that. And we repeat the process exactly like I did. We add the third image in Photoshop, we take it back into Registar, we add a fourth image, we blend the fourth image in. Eventually you get an image that looks like this. This is the images of the 10 LRGBs after they've been blended. So we're now going to go and try and add the hydrogen alpha to this set and make the final image. So the way I did that is I've taken the LRGB mosaic, I've got that. I've taken each hydrogen alpha image and I've made a monochrome mosaic using exactly the same technique, except I've used the LRGB image that I already made out into a mosaic. I use that as the underlying image to register all the hydrogen alpha images too. And that actually is a quicker process than the iterative process. I can register them very accurately now on top of the LRGB mosaic. And so once I've got all those images registered, I take them into Photoshop and I do the same types of blending, but now I just have to worry about the brightness and the contrast. I don't have to worry about the color balance between all the different images. So I get a hydrogen alpha that's nicely ready, its own mosaic to put on top of the LRGB mosaic that we already created. So how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of ways to blend hydrogen alpha into images. I'm going to show you the way that I do it. That I would say I use it 90% of the time. It's the most reliable way that works for me and gives me the result I'm looking for. It's not maybe the way you're used to doing it, because I know that a lot of people would do it by adding it to the red channel, adding the hydrogen alpha to the red channel and dealing with various things in that way. I don't do that because I find that generally I get a very muted result, or I get a color that I don't like. I find this process gives me a lot more control over the result. And it's actually the same way you build narrowband images, interestingly. You'd use a similar technique to this for narrowband images, except your LRGB image that you use would be a sulfur monochrome image or a oxygen 3 monochrome image underneath. But here we're going to look at how you use this technique just to add hydrogen alpha on top of the LRGB. And simply stated, all you do is you take both of those images into Photoshop, you take the hydrogen alpha, you select it, you copy it, you paste it, because it's already registered, on top of the LRGB image. Hydrogen alpha layer on top of LRGB. Step one, right? So at this point, what you do is you change the mode of the hydrogen alpha layer, which in this mode is layer 1. You change it to lighten. So we're in a mode now where anything that's lighter than the hydrogen alpha layer underneath it, and the background layer is LRGB. If the LRGB is lighter pixels than the hydrogen alpha, they'll shine through. If they're darker pixels, they won't. The hydrogen alpha pixels will get selected. So lighten mode is the blend. And now we're going to do the trick, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a hue and saturation layer, which you can do with one of the little icons down in the bottom right palette of the screen. And we're going to create that as a clipping mask over that layer. And so you create a hue saturation layer. If you right click on that hue saturation layer, one of the options you get is to make it a clipping mask. Select that. Clipping mask just means that that hue and saturation layer will only apply to the layer immediately beneath it, which in this case happens to be the hydrogen alpha black and white image. But we're going to change that, because when you create the hue saturation layer, you get this box above the layers panel that says hue saturation, and there's a box in there that says colorize, and you click it, you're going to color the black and white image a different color, and we're going to create it red. We're going to take the hue to be red, and you can either make it 0, which is red at the end of the slide, or you can make it 360, which is the other end, which is also red. Doesn't really matter which one. And then we're going to adjust the saturation level of that to create a red image on top of the LRGB. So off we go and we do that. We hit colorize, we take the saturation filter slider to about 50%. And just doing that, it starts to look a bit like a LRGB HA image. There's a lot of red, the detail of the hydrogen alphas there. There's some of the LRGB showing through, but not yet enough for me. There's too much H alpha in this image. We want to do some tweaking to that to make it a more pleasing end result. But I find that this colorization of the hydrogen alpha layer over the LRGB more often than not gives a more pleasing result than other techniques. Doesn't always, but it's the one I tend to use the most. So we can do things now to the hydrogen alpha layer that will make it a more pleasing end result. One of the things that you can do is you can do curves on the hydrogen alpha layer to lower its brightness and let less of its redness show through and more of the LRGB. So you're going to get more of the true color coming through. Another thing that you can do is use a layer mask to decide that you don't want some hydrogen alpha showing through at all. You're going to just paint over the hydrogen alpha layer with the mask to let the LRGB shine through completely. So in this case, what I did was I created a layer mask, and I decided I much preferred the actual just LRGB of the rosette. I didn't need the HA version of that layer dominating. So I just obscured the hydrogen alpha colorized layer on top using the layer mask on top of the background underneath it. And I painted over that with the brush. And now I've got the LRGB version of the rosette shining through. And I did something similar with the cone at the top left. And so now it's looking a bit more pleasing than it was before. There's a bit more true color intermixed with the redness of the H alpha. And that has given a more pleasing result. And you can then do other things, right? You'll probably look at that and go, well, hang on a minute. The red from the H alpha, it's pure red, because that's what we did. We colorized the H alpha as red. Well, we can change that later in the process. In this case, I've happened to flatten the image. So now we've just got the H alpha on top of the LRGB with the painting through I did of the LRGB layer. We flattened that down. So it's all one RGB image now. But I want to change the color of that red because it doesn't really look much like an H alpha color. And I can do that by using selective color at this stage and selecting reds. And I can play with the sliders here. And what I typically would do is I'd increase the magenta a bit on the red, and it gives it more that magenta bubblegum pink color of the high H alpha. It's very much till it looks correct to your eye. And you can try moving some of the cyan and yellow sliders around to get a slightly different result. And different images, I use different amount of sliders to get it to look broadly correct. So you'll see here now we've got pretty much the final image, and that was how that was done. 10 image mosaic on the H alpha, 10 image LRGBs, all blended together, registered with Registar using my H alpha blending technique that I prefer, and that got published in Astronomy magazine back in 2012. So they seem to like it. Now, so that's a typical, that's an example of a wide field mosaic, right? But to me, that's not wide enough field for me anymore. So I'm going to show you what I did to go beyond that. And this is where we get into processing with two different image scales. So we're going to get into processing with, in this case, it's a 70 millimeter image scale through the camera lens. And then we're going to blend in some nebula detail taken with 530 millimeter or 700 millimeter refractors. So here was an image I've always wanted to take of Cygnus, and it ended up being, it was my first apod. I've had two apods now, and they're both of Cygnus. It's kind of funny. So last year, I was experimenting with this technique kind of for the first time, and I wanted to see what I could do to get a really big wide field of the constellation of Cygnus, but with a lot of the nebula detail that exists in there. So I did a typical image, right? What I did was I used an SIG STF 8300. So it's a fairly smaller chip CCD camera, but it's got a 70 millimeter camera lens on it. So it's got this really wide field of view. It's imaging at 16 arc seconds per pixel, and it's got this wide field of view. And I took 6 RGB images. Each image was just under an hour of duration. So not a great depth of image in terms of duration. 6 images, it's taken at f4. I blended I processed each RGB image separately. I registered them using Registar, using that iterative technique, and I blended them together in Photoshop using the techniques that we just went through. And I created that kind of homogeneous view on the left-hand side. I did exactly the same with the H alpha. This time I took 7 image mosaic. I didn't do the whole field of view with H alpha because there isn't a lot of H alpha in the bottom left. So I saved myself some imaging time, only focused on the areas that were H alpha dominant. And I used about 11 hours there in total, and I built a 7 image mosaic out of that. Same technique that we use from the cone to rosette. And we go to combine the 2 images together using that same H alpha technique on top of the RGB this time. And so when you combine them together, this is like what it looked in Photoshop with the two layers combined using that colorization technique I showed you. That's the image before you start tweaking it, before you start brushing out bits of H alpha around the Veil Nebula that you didn't happen to like because it looks a bit weird. You can brush that out with a layer mask. You can improve the the lightness and contrast of the RGB image to bring out more of the greens and blues of the stars and the background of the Milky Way. So you can start tweaking all of that. And eventually, after you tweak all of that, those two images together and flatten it and crop it, you get this. So this is an image at the 70 millimeter focal length scale. I haven't done anything except this camera lens and the SIG STF 8300. And that's where the second bit of the technique comes in, where we can improve this image. And we can improve it because in my case, I had taken over the years, probably 6 or 7 years prior to this, I'd taken images of the North American nebula, I'd taken images of the butterfly, I'd taken a mosaic of the veil, and I had them on my hard drive. And I'm like, I know, I'm going to embed them in this wider field image. And I can do that. So I've got, these are the images that I just talked about. I had a 3-image mosaic of the veil, 38 hours, 3-image mosaic, a 7-image mosaic that I'd taken with the butterfly nebula, just like the techniques we looked at with the rosette, 2-image mosaic in North America, single image of Sharpless 81, I think that is, that I'd taken at 530 millimeter. And I'm like, I'm going to reuse these. I'm going to reuse them. And I'm going to use Registar to just take each one of these images and register it precisely into the wider field image on the prior chart. And when you do that, and then you blend these images, oops, gone too far, go back a bit here, give me a second here. When you do that, and you look at what the end result is, let's focus on some areas on the right-hand image, because the right-hand image has those higher resolution images embedded within it and blended in. So look at the Veil Nebula. Look at the difference, right? That was horrible, all red, hydrogen alpha, because my 70 millimeter didn't really capture a lot of color detail and the hydrogen alpha dominated it. But look, I've blended in the Veil Nebula that was registered down by Registar to fit exactly into the right place on this image. And then I copied one image on top of the other layers in Photoshop, and I used my mask just to let through the bits of the Veil Nebula that I needed to correctly color the left-hand image, and I've got a much more accurate rendition of the veil. And I did the same thing with the North American Nebula. Look at the image on the left, then look at the image on the right. And you'll see there's lots more detail visible in the North America because it's used that scaled down higher resolution image blended in to the wider field image. Same for the butterfly region. And that was, and if you look down the bottom right, there's the M8, the Sharpless 81, because that's where that appeared. It's just, you can see it's a bit more defined down in the bottom right, because I took an image and captured that in. And so that final image on the right was an apod. They liked that enough to make an apod, and I was like really happy with that, because it was kind of one of the first images that I'd done with this new technique. And I thought, like, well, this technique obviously works. Let's see what we can do with it, right? So I moved on from that. So this is the same image taken with the current setup. Now, I think, and I hope you'll agree, the image on the left here is a redo of the image on the right here that was an apod. And I think the image on the left is a lot better. And here's why it's a lot better. So what I did, this is like going back to the best of both worlds again. Over a period of about a month, 6 weeks, between March and April of this year, what I did was I took a 530 millimeter image mosaic, all from the North American Nebula to the Butterfly Nebula and all the intervening nebulosity. So it was a 20 image mosaic done at 530 millimeters. And it covers just the area on this image from the North America across to the butterfly, down to the butterfly, and back to the North America. It's like a square. And I did that with hydrogen alpha, but I also did it with sulfur and oxygen because I actually wanted to do a narrowband image of that nebulosity, that central nebulosity in Cygnus. So the central part of both of the images on the left and right is that 20 image mosaic, but it only covers, I would say, about probably a sixth of the overall area. Imagine if I'd had to do this whole thing with that technique of at 530, I'd be talking about 120 images. But no, what I did was I've got my 20 image mosaic, and then I took 2 images at 85 millimeters with that new setup with the STXL 11002. So a 35 millimeter format chip behind a 85 millimeter lens. 2 images mosaic together forms all of that Milky Way LRGB background that exists in the image that you see here. And then I embedded within it that 20 image mosaic of the central part of the North America to butterfly. And I also had some images that I used down just below that. I had the Tulip Nebula that I'd also imaged in hydrogen alpha. And I redid the Veil Nebula in LRGB anyway, because I wanted to take a better image of that. And I put it all together and I made the one on the left. But I made that actually after I made the one on the right. I kind of backed into that. I started with the one on the right because I'd taken a narrowband image, hydrogen alpha, sulfur, oxygen. I'd made a 20 image mosaic of that, the colorful nebula section right in the middle. And I used the 85 millimeter lens, again, 2 images, but through narrowband filters to do the narrowband background of the Milky Way. And I did my own 530 millimeter rendition of narrowband version of the Veil. And I put all that together in the same way with the techniques we've already described. And that was the APOD for this August that they did for Cygnus. So I got 2 APODs out of Cygnus, one from last year and one for this year. But bizarrely, I much prefer my image on the left, which is a redo of the one from last year. But it just goes to show you can keep improving on images. So that's the technique. And once you've got that embedding higher resolution down into wider field images like this, the sky is literally the limit, because here's where you can go next. So this was one that I just finished this weekend, but I didn't take any new images. This imaging technique of embedding in wider field images is like the ultimate reuse in the hobby, because you go back to images you took before and you see how you can use this technique to make more dramatic images out of them. So what I did with this is I had taken 2 shots of the Milky Way using a DSLR, 14 millimeter lens, and 2 images captured all the star background detail from the Sagittarius region straight past Cygnus. So I've got this beautiful star background that I got from the DSLR, but the Milky Way in it was kind of like not that great. I mean, it was just a standard DSLR Milky Way that looks nice, but it's not going to give you a really dramatic image. And so what I did was I went back and I was like, well, see, if you look at the Cygnus that's in there, doesn't that kind of look like this? Well, that's because it is. I took that, I embedded it inside this 14 millimeter 2 image mosaic. So now this is what I would call nested mosaics. So in this image, we have 2 images mosaic together using the same techniques with Photoshop that I showed you before. That's the star background. Inside that, we have the image of Cygnus, which itself happens to be a 2 image mosaic at 85 millimeter. But within that mosaic is a mosaic of 20 images at 530 millimeters, nested mosaics. And you get the reason I think this works is because all of the outer detail that you see here is just stars. There's not a lot of high resolution to capture, and your eye just gets drawn right into the areas where there's detail, and it kind of sets it all off. And yet you get to cover this, make it look really high res for a ton less effort than it would take to do this in any other way. And so if you look at the rest of this image, I'd taken a series of images through the STF 8300 at 35 millimeters for the body of the yellow body of the Milky Way down to Sagittarius. I reused those 35 millimeter images with the STF 8300 plopped into the 14 millimeter DSLR image. you'll see there's a lot of detail in the Lagoon and the Trifid and the Eagle Nebula, etc. Those are 700 millimeter images scaled down to fit into that 35 millimeter mosaic. So this is 3 levels deep mosaic at 4 different focal lengths, 250 hours of imaging time. But I made that image without taking a single new image. I used images from 8 total years, and I played around with it for 4 hours on Saturday, and that was the result. So it's quite phenomenal what you can do with this multi-layered mosaic wider field imaging technique. So even if you've only got, if you don't have 2 CCD cameras, or you don't have two lenses, you can telescope focal lengths you can use a DSLR with a CCD camera to good effect here. And so where can you go from there? Well, I showed you this one. This was one I did at the end of last year. It was taken with 9 images at 35 millimeter, plus embedded in it, the Orion Nebula and the Horsehead is taken at 530 millimeters. And there's some 700, remember that 10 image mosaic we did earlier on? Well, there it is, the cone to the rosette. That's that 10 image mosaic shrunk down with Registar, exactly where it should be, and blended into this image. So we've got that 10 image mosaic inside this 9 image mosaic, multi-layered mosaics. And it really lets you build out the whole image. And then if you just want to take it to the ultimate extreme, that's what you get. So this is the result of combining a ton of different images together, taken over a period of about 12 months. It's the entire northern Milky Way, but it's taken at various different resolutions of 70, 530, and 700, and some at 8, and the big star background at 35 millimeters with the 8300. And you just keep building these things together. And if you build one mosaic and you do another mosaic for a different area of the sky, eventually you're going to end up taking enough images where you can put those mosaics together. So I took my Milky Way mosaic and I added it to my Orion mosaic, and I added some more to the left of it with the Seagull, and I added it to some mosaics I had of the Heart and Soul Nebula and the Elephant's Trunk Nebula. And I need to go back to this and put my new Cygnus in there because it'll look even more dramatic. So you can keep these images alive, and you can keep them regenerating themselves over a period of time, just as you build up your image library. So this kind of reinvigorated everything for me in the hobby, because there's only so much you can do with some of the wide field objects. And this just let me add a whole new way of doing things and dimensionality to things. So that was the techniques, and hopefully you found that enjoyable. So I enjoyed talking you through it.
Great, thanks. So many questions.
I probably inundated you with too much information. The good thing is that the PowerPoint is fairly self-explanatory on some of the slides, so I'm quite happy to send out a version of it if you want to read through it.
Yeah, that would definitely be worthwhile. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Yeah, now everybody gets to see me eat.
Yeah. Yeah, I got, is my mic on? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Alistair, too many questions.
That's right.
So, can you bring your PowerPoint back up? There's a couple slides I'd like to.
Sure.
No? Okay.
No, sure. Yeah, give me a second.
Oh.
I gotta find it. Gotta find where it went.
While you're doing that, have you been to New Zealand at all?
No. Well, I have been I was there for a day once. Seriously, I was there for a day once. Yeah.
Pick up accents quick. I guess we can start from back to front. So, man, I'm looking at that image, and as I scan from right to left, the left almost looks like a perspective. It's like, I'm not sure how to explain it except to say that the left edge around Orion coming to the right. It looks like that's kind of close. This is kind of a view you'd get if you were closer to the left edge coming around towards you than the right edge going away. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to be fair, there's a lot of challenges when you're at this image scale with the projection of the image. So
Projection. Thank you. That's
yeah,
what I was looking for.
yeah, there's a lot of and I have to at this scale there's a bit of art involved in it because Registar isn't going to help you at this very very large scale. It'll let you build that image of Orion, or this image. Just move to the right screen. That you can do that with Registar. You can register that. It's all very precisely registered. But when you if you try and take that image, which is like this bit, and register it to this bit, it's too big a field of view for it. So what you end up having to do is you're going to do your best alignment by hand in Photoshop, and sometimes I've had to get it right because it just didn't look right. I've used a feature in Photoshop called perspective warp, and it was necessary for me to learn how to use that. And it's a bit subjective, but it gets you pretty close, because the Milky Way, this is more of the Milky Way than you can see in the sky at any one time.
See, and that's where I was going to go with my question, which is, does this actually unveil a new perspective of our Milky Way that we don't see? And what I mean by that,
yeah,
go ahead.
You could only see that from space. You could never see that all in one view at any one time from one of the hemispheres. You've got to wait for 2 seasons.
Exactly, because in truth, the Orion complex, that is closer to us than any of this other stuff that we're seeing in this image, right?
It is, but that's probably just a trick of the image rather than anything else in this case.
See, that's kind of what I was thinking. Is this shows in a wide field. Oh man, I just can't articulate the thought, but yeah, so it does reveal that is closer. But okay.
Yeah, it does. I take your point. If you look at it, it does look like Orion is closer, but I think that is more an optical illusion of the image than any other reason.
Yeah, so I was hoping it wasn't that, because, yeah, okay. I got a bunch more, but I'll let somebody else ask. Thanks. Oh yeah, well, nobody else is talking.
Keep going.
You know the amazing thing about this? You have no airplanes and no satellite trails.
Well, that's easily done. That's where the stacking of images comes in. Because each one of these images is probably, I never will do an image with less than about 8 or 9 individual subs in it. And when you've got 8 or 9 subs, you can use statistical stacking to get rid of the planes and the satellite trails pretty well.
That'd be an interesting image if you'd have left them in.
It would have been a lot more trail.
Right.
Just for grids,
Yep.
Alistair, can I ask where you're from in the UK?
I'm Scottish, but I spent most of my life living in southern England.
Okay.
Alistair, great presentation and great imaging here. I missed the first part of your presentation, and general question is two parts of questions. One was, to what extent did you plan this out and make it happen, as opposed to sort of retrospectively collect it? And in kind of the same vein, in pulling older images back in, what are the things that disqualified some to be able to, participate in the image? In other words, were there things you did that just made it impossible to incorporate some of your older images?
Well, that's a really good question, actually. So I would say, I'm trying to think where I originally started with the embedding technique. I actually think that I started it when I did the image of Orion that you can see in here, maybe I'll go to the other chart because it's a bit clearer. I did that, and that was the first image that I actually did that tried this embedded technique. And I was like, oh, that was fun. I was like, it actually worked. And I got that Orion image published, just a bit of Orion, before I added anything else onto it. I'm like, oh, I'm onto something here. Let's see what we can do. So I started to build out from there the dimensionality of the images. And I just kept going. I was like, okay, that works. Now I thought this would work. It'd be great on the Milky Way. So the next thing I went and did was the Milky Way part of this. Actually, I did the Cygnus bit first of the Milky Way, and then in the summer I moved on to do the core. And so I planned that bit of it out. Once I discovered the technique where I was trying to do an image of Orion, and I'm like, whoa, this is great. Thereafter, I started to plan it. I'm like, okay, I can plan this bit, and if I'll get my Orion wider field image done. And what I ended up doing was I took Orion in, I think it was January of 2019, and by then it was going away. So I had to wait for the end of last year to do the rest of this around it. But I had images that I could use within it because I had that 10 image mosaic of the cone to the rosette from 8 years ago. So I was like, I started, once I realized what this technique could do, I just started to plan in my mind, well, what can I do? What images have I got that I can reuse in these embeddings so I don't have to take a whole bunch more? And what can I do that's most dramatic in the sky? And I'm going to plan these images, these 35 millimeter images. So every 35 millimeter image of that 60 that I used to take this one, that was planned. I deliberately knew where I was going to take all those images because I knew that I could stitch. I had a couple of large mosaics that I wanted to stitch together to make this entire northern Milky Way. So that was how that came about. It was a kind of a bit by, this works, let's see how far it can go. And then I started to plan it. But there's only one, pretty much any 700 millimeter image that I've taken with my Takahashi setups or 530, there is no image that can't be used in this technique. The only ones that I found don't work well because they were taken before I had the wide field refractors of the Takahashi was I had an RCX 400, a Meade RCX 400 back in the day. And that was imaging at 2 meters. And of course it has a much smaller image scale. You know, it's like sub-arc second per pixel. And these images were just too wide field to use registered versions of those within it. So your image scale can't be too dreadfully out, but as you can see, it's easy to register image scales that are 10x apart. I can register a 3 arc second per pixel into a 30 arc second per pixel easily with register, no trouble at all. So the only images that you would find difficulty doing are like really, really sub-arc second type resolutions.
Excellent, thank you.
So Alistair, on a great presentation, and particularly the Cygnus pictures, they look almost three-dimensional to me. It's just beautiful to see. My question is a little more hardware related. You mentioned early on that Registar does a great job with field rotation. So led me to think, wondering if you know anything about whether Registar would be a better tool for people using azimuth mounts rather than equatorial if they're dealing with that sort of collection of data.
I would agree with it. I would say it would. I mean, seriously, I tried a lot of different image registration before I hit on Registar. And I mean, I'd used the registration in Maxim DL. I'd used Images Plus. I'm trying to think what other pieces of, I've used the image registration in CCD Stack. They're hit and miss. For me, they were hit and miss. Registar is 100%, always. It never misses. And it's very, very user friendly, simple. All it does is register. It doesn't do anything else. So it does what it does really, really well and nothing else.
Right. Well, that's a really big testimonial. I haven't done much mosaic work myself. I'm just wondering about, you know, people with all azimuth, pictures might have just, said, no,
Yeah,
we can't do
it
it.
will handle image rotation. No, I mean, it'll take 2 images either side of the meridian, register that, poof, done. It figures all that out.
Bill
Thanks.
Newbert's going to be so mad at not going to a place with internet access. He is going to be so mad. He'll watch the video, but he won't be able to ask the question. Man.
You can always ask me. You can always give my contact. Have my contact details. You can ask me any questions. Because I enjoy talking about it. This is a great hobby where everybody shares stuff. That's what I like about it. It's all about sharing techniques. I didn't learn how to do this on my own. I watched endless hours of tutorials from Adam Block and Tony Hallis. I've been to AICs and sat in presentations. I went to an AIC conference last year, and I picked up an absolute gem of a technique to help me with my narrowband images. I would not have had that narrowband image to that clarity that I have on the right-hand image there without a technique I picked up at AIC in October, November of last year.
And that technique was?
That technique was, and you'll probably go, oh, you should have thought of that, because afterwards I was like, that was stupid. So that technique was this. So in a narrowband image, you've got hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and oxygen. And I was combining them as 3 image layers like you would an RGB image. And I missed the obvious. If I used the hydrogen alpha layer after I'd done that 3 image combine, that was like combining my RGB, but in false color. It never occurred to me to use the hydrogen alpha as the luminance layer for the underlying color of the hydrogen alpha plus the sulfur plus the oxygen. The moment you do that, it transforms the image. It's like night and day.
Yeah, okay. See, okay. Yeah, because I got a couple of questions on that H alpha thing. But before I leave Bill Newbert in the dust, hey, Dan.
Yes.
While we're waiting, can you remember when he did that, when Bill did his mosaic presentation a couple of months ago?
Yeah.
Do you know if you could bring up his final image while I'm asking Alistair the following question?
I don't think I have that.
Okay, that's cool. So what happened was Bill Newbert, a club member, he did a presentation on mosaics you just heard. One of his observations of his biggest problem that he wanted to overcome was this problem of perspective, because he was taking it to the southern hemisphere. And he said he fought, right, Dan? He said he fought like the devil to get these to all line up because of the perspective, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I do believe if he left his audio on during this presentation, we'd hear about a half a dozen forehead slaps from him. I can't wait to see what he does if he reprocesses his. Oh, that was from Mauna Kea. He took him from Hawaii, is where he took him, and I would be interested if he reprocesses those using your techniques.
Yeah, the perspective is what gets you eventually on these wide field images, and it's because you're dealing with a sky curvature over a wide area, and it's each individual image is a projection of part of that curve onto a flat surface, and you're trying to fit a lot of projections together, and that's why the iterative technique for me broke down about 10 images, but when you get to 10, then they can take this wider field image and you can register. What you do actually is, you take that wide field image, you use Photoshop to scale it up so the image scales match your higher resolution image. And you can actually use Registar then to register your high resolution images on top of that blown up wider field image. And that's exactly, by the way, how I created that 20 image central mosaic that's in both of these ones. Cool. I used Registar over the big 85mm wide frames. And I registered each individual 20 images against that. And I used that as the combine for those. And it worked brilliantly. It would have been impossible with the iterative technique because it was too wide a field of view.
Gotcha. So does anybody in the group remember if Bill mentioned Registar in his processing?
No, he didn't. He used PixInsight. I'll mention it to him because I've used Registar and I have it. It might be worth trying. back when I first started, Tony Hallis had a series in Astronomy magazine, and one of his monthly columns was on how to use Registrar to do this kind of stuff. And he actually suggested finding a big wide field image on the internet, download it, and then register your images to it.
There you go. See, that's, that's even better than taking it yourself.
Yeah, that was his idea. So he didn't even bother getting the camera lens out. And I mean, but what Alistair does is way beyond what he was showing. But the same kind of theory. And back then, PixInsight wasn't the big program that it is now. And so Registrar is still considered the tool for doing this kind of stuff. PixInsight does have some tools and techniques, but I'm not sure that it's as good as Registrar on this on special things. And it might be worth trying to run Bill's images through it, give him the registered stuff, and let him try it again.
That'd be cool. Have you tried PixInsight, Alistair?
I have not. I sat through a presentation at the AIC last year on it, and it looked quite interesting. And I'm sure there's some tools in it that I would benefit from if I took the time to learn it. I've kind of got used to the way that I do it, and unless there's some kind of killer thing that it will let me do that I can't do a different way that I'm used to, it's not probably worth my time investing in learning it, because it's got a big learning curve, just like any bit of this software we use. So
yeah, me and him are a lot alike. I noticed the images, my Photoshop, I use Photoshop, and it looks much like yours. And I learned from Adam Block in 2012, and I used most of the same techniques. I learned when I went to his workshop with CCD Stack. And
that's where I learned a lot of stuff from Tony and Adam's videos. Were a fantastic source of information, and they transformed my images. They really did. Just knowing those techniques were key.
Oh, Alistair, I'm John. Very interesting presentation. I've enjoyed it. I have a question on if you're using images of different ages or vintages, how tolerant is this mosaic process to variations in the image sharpness or focus?
Never found an issue. Never found a single issue. I mean, if the image, if you were happy with the image, 8 years ago, if it was a decently processed image, and it was good quality imaging, and you're happy with it, what it looks like, it's going to register fine. No quite. I never found one that would not register. Haven't found one yet.
Well, I could see where you could get the angular separation between stars adjusted correctly, but I'm thinking more in terms of things like atmospheric conditions that may cause.
So that's where, okay. So I think I see where you're going. So that's where the techniques that I use for the blending of the mosaics come in handy, because it's not as simple as just cutting and pasting that 20 image mosaic into here and it's going to look just beautiful. You've got to use layer masks to decide where to create the blend between the sharpness of the higher resolution image and the slightly less resolution 85 millimeter image in this case. That's the artistic, but you've got to blend it right. And then you've got to do some fine adjustments on brightness and color, just so it all looks naturally blended. So you've got to be prepared to play around with each image as you embed it to make it look like it's a natural fit. And that's where the artistic bit comes in.
And that's where 99% of your learning experience is going to reside.
But all the techniques you use to blend images in a mosaic, they're all you need to know. There are no new ones I had to learn to embed the images. It's all layer masks, selective color, curves, color balance. That's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks again.
No problem.
So yeah, you kind of touched on something. I had 3 questions written down, and I think they're all pretty much related. Can you back up one more slide? Yeah. So on the slide on the left, there's 2 things about the slide on the left. First of all, it's all the red tint in there,
Mm-hmm.
which is H alpha, right?
It is.
Okay. And then a lot of that, like on the bottom lower left corner, a lot of that tends to disappear in the final image.
It does.
And that was a decision on your part how to blend that, right?
In this case, all I did was I did some color adjustments. I did a color balance. So what I would have done there from that left to get to the right is I'd have gone into color balance, selected shadows, and toned down the reds.
Okay. But the image on the left does show the quantity of H alpha light in that area.
It does.
Okay. Which means if you were to keep that data there, then the image on the, okay, so the image on the left is a more representative view of the H alpha content.
It is, and it isn't, right? Because this is where it gets very subjective, because I wouldn't say that the images I produce are particularly scientific, right? So the issue with the technique that I use to combine to make the one on the left is that you end up with an over domination of hydrogen alpha. Because basically you're going to use the hydrogen alpha layer. You're going to make this really red layer, put a huge red layer above the image, and you're going to let the underlying image try and shine through it. And that's an imperfect process. Yeah. It results in great red color where you want it, but it results in red color where it really doesn't belong. And so a lot of what I do after that is I take it out where it doesn't really belong with color balance in the background. Sometimes I'll even select an area that just doesn't look right, and I'll just color balance that particular area, just to get the balance right for the overall image. That's why that hydrogen alpha blending technique is probably not as scientifically accurate as adding it to the red channel, but it results in a much nicer image.
Oh yeah, right. Oh, I'm not criticizing.
No, but it's an important distinction between science and art, and it's a tricky balance for all of us at times, right? There's a point where the science, the art takes over from the science sometimes.
Yeah, and that's why I was just trying to gauge what your resulting image might look like if more of the H alpha was left in. How much more of our Milky Way, how much more content of H alpha is in our Milky Way that, we would.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, if you want to see a little bit of what it looks like, right, you can go back to this next one. There you go. Look, there's all the H alpha. You can see it really there.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, I know that Sean Walker, who's the editor of Sky and Telescope magazine, the photo gallery, he's involved in some project that's doing this like entire global sky map in H alpha. Yeah. And he has got some incredible wide field mosaics now with intense amount of it. It puts that H alpha to shame. And it's really, go online, look for it. You'll see the vast quantities of H alpha that are out there. And I was actually using it as a reference image when I was working on this. And you can see that red loop to the right. You're like, what's that? That's the redness super bubble, however you pronounce it. And I was looking at his image to see, I think I've brought out the detail that's in my image. Am I bringing out detail that's really there, or are my eyes making it up? Because it was really, really faint. And I was using his as a reference because it's as clear as day in his. I'm like, no, it's there because it's just really, really faint in my image. But his is really bright because they've just focused on hydrogen alpha everywhere.
Yeah, because we see the images from the spacecraft, like in UV and the gamma ray and the X-ray. Your technique would be applicable. You could include some like Compton X-ray images. You
could absolutely do that. Yep.
And then you wind up with some really, really weird false color.
Maybe I'll have to try that.
Images that are. So go back to that last. The one where you were mixing. Yeah, 2 slides back.
Yeah, real quick.
What's the last question about this? Pardon? Oh.
Real quick, John or Grant. There's a guy that posts on Cloudy Nights called John. What's his name? John Thomas, or I'll get his name, but he's used the Spitzer data and things like that and integrated it into his images. And yes, it does make some really neat stuff. And I'll James Thomas or something. I'll post his name because he has a website and he's got a lot of interesting images using the odd data from Spitzer and other places.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, because it's just sometimes you know, a lot of sciences or a lot of discoveries are made by, well, what if I took this and added it to that? Well, if you don't blow your face off, generally you got a pretty cool discovery, you know?
Yep.
So going back to that other image, forward about 3. The one we were originally talking about.
Which one was that?
Oh, that one, okay, that's because that was the precursor. That was your precursor.
Okay, oh, you want the side by side. Okay, all right. The side by side.
Yeah, so I noticed, again, looking at the one on the left, it looks like you can still see some of the stitching on the lower left-hand side, right next to the veil. Okay, so that is a remnant of artifact of stitching?
Yeah, that was my overlay of the H alpha that was not a complete overlay of everything that was in this image. So on the image on the right, it's taken out because I painted over it using masks in Photoshop.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because that star in the center on the left, you can start to kind of, and it's just like I've always been wondering about this stitching process, and when you talk about doing blending, I was really surprised to see you had some areas demarcated out to do the blending. Is there feathering involved there? Because I would
every time you do a selection, you have to feather it, and the amount of feather depends on how big your selection is. If you're doing a really big selection, you can feather it quite a bit, so it's a really gradual blend. But yeah, every selection I do, in fact, I can't think of a single selection I would ever do that isn't feathered.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks. I'm like, I'll bet he's going to say yes. And if he doesn't, I really want to hear what he does. Because I tend to like to use a lot of the dodge and burn tool.
I've used that too. I use that on occasion. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
It can be good for some fine touch-ups. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
All right. Yeah, that's it. Hey, thank you, dude.
I just love the questions. These are brilliant questions. You made me think. It's good.
I'm waiting to hear what Bill Newbert. How are you gonna get this video to Bill, Dan?
He'll see it when he comes back.
Actually, I would like to be there when he watches it, just to see his reaction. Maybe we could turn on his laptop camera, then he doesn't know what's going on while he's watching the video.
Just tell him to send me an email, and I'll talk to him on the phone through the presentation if he wants.
You got an email address where you can include like $100 PayPal tip for that?
Yeah, this isn't a hobby where you get rich.
Yeah. Oh man. So is Mike still with us here? Who is it? Yeah, Mike. You still here?
Which Mike?
Mike Gradio?
Yeah, I'm still here.
You haven't asked any questions, man.
Just been taking it in.
Mike is one of the guys that tends to do some really, really, really good imaging and post-processing. And he's one of our Pix Insight gurus.
Ah, okay. Well, he could probably teach me quite a lot because I know the basics of Pix Insight.
Mike, you were the one that took the seminars at one of the special seminar sessions, didn't you?
I did a Pix Insight seminar with Warren Keller, and Ron Breacher, or whatever his last name is.
Yeah. You know, sometimes I tend to ask maybe impertinent questions, and this one's kind of, what do you think, Mike? Do you think PixInsight has got some offerings for this, or has Alistair pretty much got this thing nailed with the system he's got? I really hate it to ask it that way.
I'm interested in the answer because I'm always, there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, so I haven't actually used PixInsight to do a mosaic yet. I'm actually gathered a bunch of data for the Eastern and Western Veil Nebula to do a 4x4 panel. My philosophy is that whatever works well for an individual is what works well for them. And I know that PixInsight has a lot more than it used to when it comes to mosaics, but I think this Registar stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's my favorite bit of software.
Well, that's good news. And so far, no one's improved on perfect then.
Any other questions, guys?
Oh yeah. Just wait till we start doing this stuff.
Well, as I said, I'm always here and I'm happy to help anybody anytime.
And Dan's got your email, right?
He does.
Thanks, man. This is great.
Nothing's going to happen until some smoke goes away.
That's true.
Ooh. I bet software tools were available to erase that effect. Okay. I'll bet. And John Bury can hang up his M111 filter as soon as we've got software that cuts through the clouds. What do you think, John?
We give it a try. I'm starting to think the skies are starting to look like the images we get from Mars.
Oh boy. Oh, that was something. We're talking about the dust storm on Mars 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Alistair, a bunch of us, and Dan down below, we got a 14-inch out at a park nearby. And back in 2018, we were going to do the Mars observing program from the Astronomical League. So we go out there, and Dan and Mike and Rick and a couple other guys that do top-notch astrophotography, they got everything all set up in order to do this program. And we're out there, and we're starting to get some results, and this dust storm blows up.
Oh no.
Yeah, well, the funny thing was, one morning we were out there doing some testing, and we got an image, and we're looking at the screen, and there's a bright spot. We're like, what is that? And it was kind of like, it must be Hellas Basin, you know. And then we just, archived the data, and about 2 days later comes this announcement about this dust storm forming on Mars.
Ah.
And I went back and looked at these images, and it turned out that we were the first ones to get an image of this dust storm.
Wow.
But we didn't publish it.
Oh.
And we're, first to publish, right?
Yep.
So it was pretty cool because it just rotated. It started on the far side, and it rotated into view, and we caught an image of it.
It's great when you can capture something like that, though. That's just great.
So Dan Krausen right there, he likes to do a lot of the citizen science stuff. We missed an opportunity there for him. Oh. So that's, yeah. What we need to do is we need to get a Mars filter that cuts through dust storms, get a cloud filter so that we, and then smoke filters. Boy, I tell you what, if Lumicon comes up with them, they're going to be $1 billion company. Right?
Yeah, I would agree. Yep, I agree.
Well, the dust in other parts of the country, much worse. My daughter lives in Moab, Utah, and she sent me some images of essentially an early morning rising sun, to which there is no horizon. The mountains in that direction are just totally obscured.
Wow.
The sun is just an orange, soft edged, bright spot in the sky. And I can only hope that as it's passing over us now, somewhat more diluted and thinner in the atmosphere, I can only hope, though, that we don't get a significant amount of rain, because it will bring that dust down and coat everything.
Better than all the pollen that's coming out of the trees. Gosh almighty.
Well, you know, we get the bee pollen in the spring where everything turns yellow. There's so much of it.
Yeah, that too.
But this stuff would probably be worse.
Have we heard of any red sunrises or sunsets lately? Like, you remember the Vancouver fire about 3 or 4 years ago? Remember how we had that really red sun at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Are we getting that?
Yeah. Last night it was red.
Okay. I gotta get out and start getting another couple of shots. So where are you at, Alistair? Where are you at right now?
I'm in Tucson, right? It's also smoky.
Ooh, Tucson. Well, you're a couple hundred miles closer than Dan is down in
Yeah.
no, not Tuca, Las Cruces. No,
I didn't see the sun for 3 days.
oh yeah, I went out today, and I thought it was sunny out, and I look up, and it's like it looked like high cirrus was. I didn't stop to think about the smoke.
Complete even gray from horizon.
Yeah, that was the same way it was up here. I didn't even stop to think that was the smoke. Wow. I might set up my camera tonight and just get some crazy ass shots. Seriously, I wonder what. I've been futzing around with a fisheye lens for Meteor, and
That was like fun.
that might not be a bad thing to do tonight. What are you shaking your head for, Steve?
Because it ain't worth a picture.
Well, it is in a way of here's a clear night, and here's not so clear night.
This is going to be like a transparency about 2 night.
If even that, it's yeah, I would think it's going to be a 1 maybe. Well, that and because I'm in St. Louis, so I'm looking through everybody's damn porch light when I look up at the sky. So you get a lot of this light pollution reflecting off of that smoke layer. So I want to maybe get some before and after shots, or actually during and after shots.
Well, it's been kind of a
Put it
rough
over your lens.
It's been kind of a rough year. Simply, earlier this year in the spring we had the
COVID,
the Sierra dust clouds come across the Atlantic.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And turn up through the Gulf and into the central part of the country. We were seeing some Sierra desert dust suspended.
That one out.
That blows away, and now we get the California fires. So,
Yep.
Well, don't forget COVID. And how many star parties been canceled because of that thing?
all of mine.
Yeah, they canceled IDSSP. Damn.
Well, I'm going to wander off. Thank you very, very much, Alistair.
Yep, that's okay. And I was going to ask Dan, if you don't mind, I need to prepare for a work call in 20 minutes. So
No problem. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
no, that was great. I can't thank you enough for the questions, guys, because they were great and they really made me think. It was really, really good. I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Good to meet everyone.
Thanks again. It was great. I'm going to bug out too.
All right. Yeah. Leaving like droves. It's like a SLAS meeting. As soon as the speaker's over, everybody's gone.
Yeah. I got an email during this from Bill, and he was wanting me to go ahead and run the presentation, but I think we should just hold it.
Yeah.
Next month.
There's only 4 of us left.
Yeah. I don't know. Bill's really good with that kind of stuff, being in optics and stuff. So everything he does is interesting. So It's just not the same if he's just narrating a bunch of slides.
Well, but see, now here's the flip side of that coin, Dan. This is the, if you would have attended, this is what you would have seen. Okay. But since you didn't attend, you missed that.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and shut the recording.